Hello, welcome to our webinar. Today's webinar is on what's new in SOLIDWORKS 2013. I am John Lieber. I'm an applications engineer with GoEngineer, and I'm here to show you a few of the things that I find interesting, new, or exciting with SOLIDWORKS 2013. Due to our time constraints, I won't be able to cover everything that's new in SOLIDWORKS 2013, but I hope to show you some stuff that will be handy or helpful to you. First, I'd like to start off with some of the user experience or user interface enhancements or new functionality. Now, this isn't something new, but it's always handy to know some of the stuff that we've introduced over the last couple years. And the first thing is I don't want to edit this sketch, so I'm going to double click on the line. That will put me into the edit sketch. Now, if I come in and say I'd like to create some geometry, I can select my line tool. And if I right click, I have an option in here. Now this one isn't new, but it's called Sketch Numeric Input. And basically what this does is create geometry and the dimensions at the same time, which is really handy. But what we found is in previous versions of SOLIDWORKS, sometimes it would create dimensions where we didn't want to place a dimension. So in this example, if I come down here and say, well, let's create a line segment. So we'll start my line right here. We'll come across. I'm actually going to use a double dimension, which would require me to actually manually dimension this line segment. So instead of actually typing in a value, I'm just going to click with my left mouse button and SOLIDWORKS will remove the dimension. As I move my cursor up to create another line segment, I can type a value, in this case 8 millimeters. If I hit the enter key, you'll see it creates the line as well as places a dimension. This works very well, allowing me to very quickly come in and create my geometry and have it dimensioned. It works just as well with things like arc. So if I switch over to an arc, I can say that's going to be 2.5 for radius, and it'll create that, and I can just finish off where the arc is going to end. We'll go ahead and place that. We'll place a few more line segments here. We'll go in. In this particular case, I don't want a line segment because I'm going to do the double dimension again. So enter no value. When I place or left click to finish the line segment, it doesn't place the dimension. Go ahead and finish this off. We'll say this is going to be 12. And then we'll just close it up here. So I'm going to switch back to my dimension tool. So I'm going to use my shortcut key S to bring up my shortcut bar. We'll place the dimension, selecting the line and the center line, and just by simply crossing that center line, that will place the dimension in there. We can come in, we'll hit enter. Oh, accidentally hit escape there. We'll place the value. We'll say this is going to be 9 millimeters. And if you remember from, I think it was last year's release, SOLIDWORKS remembers the fact that I had the center line selected, so when I make another click, I don't have to reselect that center line. We can just say this is going to be 7, and I've got my geometry. So adding dimensions as we're sketching without having to worry about over-defining or over-dimensioning the sketch. Just by not placing a dimension, it won't place, or a value into the dimension, it won't place the dimension. Now, my arrows here, they're hollow or not filled arrows. I'd like to change that, so I need to go to my options and find out what option that is. Now I could go here to document properties and go through all these different items to see which one is controlling the arrows. SOLIDWORKS 2013 has a new search function in the options. What this allows me to do is come in and type something like arrow. It will show me all the different options for my arrows right here, the drafting standard dimension arrows. I can click on that. It highlights that option right here, and I can just very quickly or easily find the different options that I'm looking for. Clicking on OK switches my arrows over. What that allows me to do is very quickly and without having to remember exactly what all the different options are inside of SOLIDWORKS. Leave that to our tech support guys. But you can get through that dialog box pretty quickly and find the stuff that you're looking for and make those modifications. So a few things here. Let me go ahead and switch over to my assembly and open up another part that has more than one feature in it. Because a lot of people have been asking SOLIDWORKS for a way of getting into the feature manager without having to click on all these little plus signs to find the particular sketch we're looking for. So SOLIDWORKS introduced a new function here. If I go to the very top of the feature manager, right click, I can come down here to tree display, and we have a new function or new option called show flat tree view. What this will do is it'll take all the sketches, separate them out from their features. So instead of having to go to the feature, click on the plus sign, I have my sketch, the feature, sketch, and feature. If I have something like a loft or a sweep, you might see 2 or 3 sketches before the feature because those require multiple sketches. Now another thing that we have available to us is when we create our fillets. Now in the past, SOLIDWORKS added this fillet expert. One of the benefits of using the Fillet Expert is when you selected an edge, a little menu would pop up that would make additional edge selections for you, so you didn't have to actually go in there and make all those selections by hand. But that was only available in the Fillet Expert, and that didn't work if you're using a multi-body part, for example. So starting with this new release, even if I'm using the manual fillet command, come in, we'll specify a value, we'll say 2 millimeters. When I select one of the edges, we get that pop-up menu that will show here, and in purple it's giving me a designation or a reference as to what it would select if I clicked on that icon. If I come over here, select here, it's going to do the bottom and top of the pocket. If I keep going over here, I can see that it will take care of both of those pockets for me. Instead of having to make all those different selections, SOLIDWORKS will make those selections for me. Another new function is center mass. Now in the past, to do center mass, you go to evaluate and select mass properties, and it would show here in this purple little center mass mark. Sometimes it was hard to see, and as soon as we close this dialog box, that center mass would go away. So some of the ingenious users created a macro. If you want, you can search for that on Google. That will put a 3D sketch point at the center of mass. But what's nice is in SOLIDWORKS 2013, I'm going to use my search function. I'm going to find a command. I'm just going to start typing center. You see I have a new command here called center of mass. If I click on the command, it will add the center of mass for me. I can click and drag it onto a toolbar, or if I come over here to the glasses, it will find the glasses for me. Now again, this isn't something that's quite new, but it is helpful to know that that command is there to allow you to search for your command. So by default, it sits down here, it's showing me a little arrow, tell me where to click, and there's the center of mass. I've actually added it right here because I like this command quite a bit. If I click on it, you won't see much of anything happen, but you'll see here in the feature manager a new command or a new feature been added called center of mass, and more specifically right here in the center of my part, it's added the center of mass. We also have the option of right clicking and selecting the center of mass reference point. What this does, this will add a reference point at the bottom of the feature manager, but this reference point can be moved. This allows us to go in and say, well, what is the center of mass if I look at the part up to this point? So you can see how adding new features will affect the center of mass. Another thing I'd like to point out here is if I create a drawing, so we'll say make a drawing from this part, and we'll go ahead and place a top view on here. So we'll just throw a top view, maybe throw a bottom view, and a right view, and throw a nice little isometric view. Don't really like the orientation of that, so we'll go ahead and hit our 3D view. Select this. This will actually allow me to rotate this around in my drawing view so I can get exactly what I'm looking for. But in this particular case, what I wanted to specifically focus on is if I select this view, come back into my feature manager, expand this out, there's that center of mass point. I can right click and say show, and that center of mass will now show in the part, whether we're in the part model or the drawing of that part. The nice thing about having this available is if I select my dimension tool, I can select the edge of the part, for example, and dimension to that center of mass point, which allows me to quickly and easily dimension to the center of mass. Let's grab the corner and get center of mass dimensioning on my drawing very quickly, very easily. So those are some of the new functions as far as the interface for the part's concerned. I'm going to go ahead and close this and go back into my assembly. So here's my assembly. The center of mass is available as an assembly feature as well. So if I go in here and find my center of mass tool, I can get the center of mass of the assembly. So now that I have the center of mass of the assembly, let's go ahead and close this assembly out, and I'm going to open up another assembly. Now, how many times have you gone into a directory and found that you had all sorts of stuff in that directory that makes finding your actual parts a little bit more difficult? If I come and say, show me my parts, assemblies, drawings, I've got all these different parts in here. If I go back and let's grab another assembly, and we'll get in here. Okay, so we're going to find another assembly directory. So here's my assembly delighters, and you see I've got a lot of parts going through here, and I've got parts and sub-assemblies, and if I'm looking for a specific part file, I have to keep coming down here and say, well, let's just see parts. Then if I'm looking for a drawing, we can say go find the drawings. But starting with SOLIDWORKS 2013, we have these quick filter buttons now. So I can say let's filter parts, let's say just assemblies or just drawings, or I can actually select multiple items. So here's parts and drawings, so I can find just parts and drawings and not have to worry about seeing any of the assembly features or assemblies. We also have a new option right here, and this I think is one of my favorite enhancements, is that show me the top level or filter top level assemblies. If I select that guy, it's going to actually go through and find just my top level assemblies. In this particular case, I'm going to select my track setting machine and click on open. Now this assembly is pretty big. It's going to take a few seconds to open, but I wanted to point out here I do have the center of mass being displayed. Now my assembly is actually in reference to this track setter, the yellow mechanism sitting on top of the track. The track itself is just there as a reference, so I put it in there so I can make sure that everything's lined up right. Maybe I'm going to be using 3D via Composer to create some detailed views of this for our marketing or training manuals. So I have the tracks in there, but I don't actually want those tracks as part of the assembly, because right now if I generate a bill of materials, those tracks are going to show up. If I go in and ask it where is the center of mass or how much does this assembly weigh, those tracks are going to be included. And those tracks, those ties are really heavy, and it'll come back and say that this thing weighs probably, I think we did a measurement before, about 10,000 pounds. This unit that I'm actually working with does not weigh 10,000 pounds, and it's not going to work for me. So a couple new features or functions that are available in SOLIDWORKS 2013 is I can actually go take these parts or assemblies, and if I go to their properties, I can actually tell the computer to make those an envelope. And what happens with the envelope, if I say create this as an envelope, you'll see it automatically says exclude this from the bill of materials. So it's going to exclude it from the bill of materials, as well as kind of give it a transparent look. So you can see as I roll this up, it's no longer opaque. It's got a kind of a transparent mode to it. Now, if I create a bill of materials, those aren't going to be counted in with the bill of materials either. So some of the new functions additional new functions here is if I go in and select a component, if I right click and say select subassembly, this component is actually several subassemblies deep. It's part of a subassembly that's part of the top level assembly. So in 2013, when I say select subassembly, it'll actually give me the option of saying, do you want to select this subassembly or do you just want to select this one? If I select this one here, it selects that. That's not the one I'm looking for. If I zoom in, you can see it's just selecting the top pieces. So again, I'll right click and say select subassembly, and I can select the whole thing here and say I'd like to open that. So a few of the things that we have here is the ability to select an item. So in this particular case, if I select this item, you'll see he's part of a subassembly. So this guy right here, he's part of this subassembly. If I hit delete, in previous versions of SOLIDWORKS, it would delete the entire subassembly. Now I can actually select a component and have it delete that component. So if I come down here and select this, hold the control key, select this guy right here as well, and select delete, it will just remove those components. I don't have to worry about deleting the assembly by accident or going into the assembly. I'm going to actually bring those back by using the by closing this and saying discard the changes, and show you a couple more things that we have available to us. Now I did forget to show you a couple things on this little assembly, so let's go ahead, go back in and open that up. And I do want to delete a few components out of here, so you can see I'm going to go ahead and grab this guy right here. So we'll grab this one, this guy, and we'll hit the delete key. That will delete those components. Again, even though those are part of a subassembly, they're not actually going to remove the subassembly, it's just going to delete the components. Now if I want to insert components, I can go to my insert components command, select browse, and I can go find those parts again. So I can select this guy, and I'll grab a couple more. Let's just actually sort this. I'll grab that one. So we'll just grab these two here. Now I've selected multiple components. When I click on the open button, it's going to place those components here. But with 2013, I can actually select which components I want to insert. So it's kind of a multi-insert without having to insert components. Just kind of dropping them in and then placing the components in. Use my smart mates to go ahead and place those in here. So I'm going to select the components I want to insert. So let's go find, we'll grab a part and a sub-assembly here. This isn't going to help too much. I want to show parts and assemblies. Sort of PDM tools coming real handy. Being able to search. And we'll grab this part and this sub-assembly. So I'm selecting multiple components when I click on open. Previous version, SOLIDWORKS would just let me drop those components in there, and then I'd have to go in and do the mating manually or by hand. In this particular case, I can actually select now what component I want to insert. So you can come in and say, well, let's insert this guy. Or we can place the brake pad here. So we'll place the brake pad. Now, by selecting my Insert Components command, I'm going to select multiple parts to insert into my assembly. So I'm going to grab a part file and this sub-assembly. When I click Open, it's going to allow me to drop both of those components in there, and then I can manually mate those. But by selecting the push pin here, I can select which component I want to insert. Use my smart mating functions to go ahead and place that component in here. I can place another one, so we can come over here and select, I want one of those over here. So it's going to smart mate that in here. I'll come back and delete that one. Then I can select my assembly. We'll go ahead and place those out here. So I can place one in there to be concentric, or if I come in and select the edge, I can place those in here. So you can see very quickly, very easily, I can build up my assemblies. Just select the components I want to insert into the assembly, and then from the feature manager select. So if I wanted to place another one of these guys in here, I can place them in here. Once I'm done, I'm going to go ahead and hit the X to close that dialog, and we'll remove these two extra parts I placed in there. Just window select those. So you can see with SOLIDWORKS 2013, inserting components into the assembly got a lot easier. Now we do have a few functions that I can show you here at the top level. If I go back into this top level, it's going to update the assembly. But if you ever create folders, which are actually pretty handy when you're trying to kind of keep this feature manager in order here, but you can create folders. You can say, well, we need this group of components, these hose ends and flat face components. We can right click and say create a sub-assembly or a folder, and we can give this a name. But what's nice now is these folders are not dependent on the order that things are placed into the assembly. So in the past, if I tried moving this around too much, the computer would come back and say, hey, that's violating parent-child relationships, and that's not something that I wanted to do. So it would not let me do it. SOLIDWORKS 2013 no longer has that limitation. So let's show you a little bit more on some sketching functionality. Just to kind of keep it interesting, we'll jump back and forth between different functions. But this one is purely a sketch option here. And we're going to open this up. And this is the ability to create conics. Now inside my part here, I have my design binder, and we'll go ahead and open this Word document. Just so you can kind of understand what we're looking at or what we're talking about when we say conics. In the past, SOLIDWORKS has had the capability of creating circles, ellipses, and parabolas, but basically what we're looking at is this hyperbola. We have some sketches here to kind of show you what we're looking at. If you take a cone and you cut it, you can get all these different options. Now these three here, what were available in the previous versions of SOLIDWORKS, now we have this option here. So to create that, we have a sketch command. It's going to be under the ellipse command here called conic. And how we create the conics is click on an endpoint. In this particular case, we'll select another endpoint. You don't have to have an endpoint, but for this sketch it makes sense. And then define an angle and then a size right here. So you can actually come back in and place that. Now this guy here, if you want to, you can turn on your curvature comb so you can see how the curvature is affecting it. I do have a feature actually already built, so that's what it's showing me right here, that yellow. So I can place that in here. I can also go ahead and add dimensions to the conic. So by selecting on the conic, I can place an RHO value of say 0.25. That will place that in here. You can see I have another one over here. I can modify its value and say 0.5, for example. But what this allows us to do is create very complex geometry very quickly. If I go in and create a section view, you can see this is very similar to one of those Dyson fans. But to create this shape would have required a little bit more work, or possibly the use of a spline in previous versions of SOLIDWORKS. Now I don't have to worry about that as much with the availability of the conic command in the sketcher. So let's go see what we have next here. Configurations. Now configurations is something that's pretty big for a lot of users. You can say this particular assembly has two configurations. We'll just open up the 2-inch configuration. And how do you create configurations? Now there's several ways you can use the configure feature commands, but at the assembly it's usually a lot easier to create a spreadsheet. So to create the previous configurations, this 1-inch and 2-inch cylinder, I had a spreadsheet that was created. We'll go ahead and open that and just say edit the table in a new window. Now if you've done this before, I wanted to point out a couple things. This dialog box that just popped up used to sit in the background, and you have to know by coming to one of our training classes, for example, that you have to switch back to SOLIDWORKS to click on this so you can say OK or cancel or select items to add into the configurations. 2013, this dialog box will always come to the forefront, so it will open up the spreadsheet and then bring this dialog box to the front window, so you know I have to click on OK or cancel. In this particular case, I'm going to hit cancel. It's going to open up the spreadsheet. I wanted to point out that the spreadsheet opens maximized. Previous versions of SOLIDWORKS, it doesn't always open up maximized. It just depends on how it was left the last time. So in the spreadsheet, we now support validations. So in this particular case, I have a list of values that are available to me. I've set that up in the spreadsheet prior, and it just makes me creating these configurations a lot easier. I'm going to take this row, make copy, we'll paste it right over here. So it's pasted in here. We're going to rename this and call this, let's say 4-inch cylinder. So we'll just say 4-inch cylinder with clevis. And instead of having the type in values, I can just select from my validation rule. So we'll say the 4-inch, we'll make this 4 inches as well. We'll make this male or female. So we'll say, let's go to male. So we'll go to 4-inch male. And right here, I like this one because I never really remember, oh yeah, there's 2 P's or 2 R's and the letter suppressed, or the word suppressed. So I always just used R or S, but if you need to type in, if you feel that it's necessary to type in the full word suppressed or resolved, you can just select those now. In this particular case, I'm going to say it's resolved. I want to show the clevis, and when I close this out, it's going to go ahead and create that configuration for me, and I can switch right over to that configuration right here. So you can see I now have a 4-inch option with the clevis. Now if I open this shaft here, the shaft itself has the different sizes. That's how we were able to go in and say it's a 4-inch male versus a 4-inch female, and it has a table available as well. I did want to show you a couple features that are available to the design tables when they're talking about parts. Again, it's going to bring this dialog up to the front. We'll select cancel, open up the spreadsheet, maximized, and this column right here. This is a new column for 2013. This allows you access to your SOLIDWORKS materials. So instead of having to manually configure those, you can now configure them in your spreadsheet. So if I look at the 0-inch none, I can change its value to brass. We'll go to the 4-inch none, and we'll change its value to copper. When I close the dialog or close the spreadsheet, it's going to go ahead and make those modifications to the part. And if I go into the 0-inch none, you'll see the part color will change. And if I go into the 0-inch female, I think it was, we can see the different values and different changes in the colors. So if you create configurations, another kind of fun thing here is you'll know that each time you create a configuration, the SOLIDWORKS part or assembly gets a little bit bigger because it's got to store that configuration information. So we have a new option. If I come back into my options, I'm going to use my search function again. So configurations, and we have a new option under system performance, the ability to purge the cache configuration data. What this allows you to do is actually create your configurations, but remove the configuration information from the memory before you save the file. That makes the files a little bit smaller, they're quicker to open. But if there's certain configuration information that you want to store, that you want to be available when you open the file, you'll see we have these new options. You'll see these little check boxes and minus signs, as well as the ability to right click on something and say add a rebuild or save mark. And by selecting that, it puts a little save mark in here. When I rebuild, it will make sure that that configuration is rebuilt, so you don't have to switch to that configuration and manually rebuild it. Also, when you close the file, if you have that purge cache option selected, it's going to purge out all the configuration information except for the active configuration and the configuration that has the little save marks. Again, it's just a nice little performance enhancement that if you're dealing with configurations, it makes things easier or quicker to work with. We're going to close these parts out and the assembly, and we're going to move to the next section here. So the next section is what we're calling the multithin extrude command. Now there's a couple things in here that are pretty handy. Down here I have a sketch. I'm going to double click on it to edit, and you'll see here I have 4 line segments. Now in the past, if I tried to extrude this, SOLIDWORKS would come back and tell me you can't, because you couldn't have 4 open segments. You couldn't have 2 open segments in a single sketch. Starting with SOLIDWORKS 2013, I'm going to select these items and say I'd like to create the extrude, and it will allow me to create an extrusion off of all 4 segments. So I don't have to create 4 separate sketches and then 4 separate extrudes. With SOLIDWORKS 2013, I can just do all 4 at one time. Another thing I want to point out here is I'd like it to extrude. I'm going to go up to the body over here, and I'm going to go up to the body on the other side. In the past, I could always do direction 1 and direction 2 from the feature manager, but if I right clicked, I could only do direction 1. Now we can actually access direction 1 and direction 2. So I can come over here, say direction 1, up the body, select the body, right click and say direction 2, up the body, and select the body again, and you can see here how it's allowing me to actually extrude in both directions with the right mouse button. Another thing that's really handy is I do have equations and global variables for this part, and I have a global variable that defines the thick value that I want to use for the extrusion. Now in the past, what I have to do is I have to hit the checkbox at this point, then modify the dimension and use my global variable or equation commands. Now in the feature manager dialog boxes, I can access those equations and global variables. In this particular case, I'm going to hit the equal sign, and I can say that it's equal to 1 divided by 2 or something like that. But in this particular case, I'm just going to say I'd like it to be equal to the width value. By selecting that, it's going to go ahead and place that equation link to the global variable, and I can hit my checkbox. Again, it's just removing some of those repeated steps that I had to do in the past. So I've got my 4 ribs here. I was able to create those as one feature. I was able to link them to my global variables within the dialog box of the feature manager instead of having to worry about creating it, go back into the dimension and modifying it there. Now if I look at these values here, you also see that if I look at the managed equations, all these equations now have unit of measurements in this dialog box. What this allows is for a more consistent user interface, so we know, okay, this is going to be 0.5 inches versus 0.505 millimeters. Also, when I'm making changes, so if I were to come down here and say millimeters, global variables in the past, they didn't have a unit of value. So if I said they were 1 inch and then switched the units to millimeters, they would be 1 millimeter. By having those values in there, it's a lot easier to understand when I'm reading the dialog box, as well as if I'm switching units. We have a more consistent rebuild. So now let's talk about some of the cool things that kind of work in both assemblies and in parts. So in this particular case, I'm going to use an assembly, and then we're going to look at the part as well. So the whole wizards and cosmetic threads. Again, Just being able to click on this little button, say show me the top level assembly. When this guy opens up, you'll see that there's a whole bunch of little circles out here that just kind of seem to be floating in the air. Now what these are is the cosmetic threads. Now when SOLIDWORKS first came out, we had these cosmetic threads, and then we added the graphical cosmetic threads that kind of throws that little graphic on the holes. But in this particular case, these little cosmetic threads here, we need those for the drawings, but I don't want to display them in the assembly because they can get in the way when I'm making my selections, and they just don't look really nice when I'm working in the assembly. So by going to the annotations folder in the feature manager, I can right click, come down here to details, and they've split the shaded cosmetic threads, which is the little graphics inside the holes or on the shafts of a bolt, for example, and the cosmetic thread itself. By unselecting cosmetic thread and clicking on the OK button, it removes all those little guys out of here. Now, that works in both parts and assemblies. And in this particular case, I'm going to use my assembly tool because I need to put some dowel holes right here. So I'll select my part, we'll come over here to my assembly features and say use the hole wizard. And there's some new options in here. By selecting simple hole or hole, under my standard I can say, well, we're going to do inches, we might say millimeters, but right here you'll see I have a new hole type called dowel holes. By selecting dowel holes and selecting the size, we'll say maybe 7/16. You can specify, make them a clearance, and you can specify your dimensional tolerances, so we can say this is a D or an H. But what this allows me to do is go ahead and just use my SOLIDWORKS geometry in the assembly to place my dowel holes. We'll just reference those. We'll place them right here, so the dowel holes will go right where the shafts are. And in my options, I have the ability to say, let's just make this go through all. Now, it's not actually going to go through every part in the assembly because it will. I can say just go through the parts. In this particular case, I can just say off up to a surface. We can just pick the back side of this part and we'll just go up to that point. But more specifically, I can come in here and say propagate feature to the parts. By selecting that, when I click on the OK button, it's going to place those holes in there for me. So I have the holes for the shafts, but if I select the open command, you'll see I do have those holes here in the plate. If I create a drawing of the plate and create a view that's going to show me those two holes, you'll see SOLIDWORKS has automatically placed the dowel hole symbols into those holes. You can turn that off if you want to, but I find it pretty handy not to have to think about it. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the new sheet metal functionality. Let me close these parts and assemblies and drawings out and get a sheet metal part open. Now, SOLIDWORKS is constantly looking at the sheet metal functions and seeing what they can add, what they can do to make things easier. And a couple releases ago, we introduced the ability to create a multi-bodied sheet metal part. And that's what we have here on the screen. If I take this cover and I hide it, you'll see I've got this. I had the cover, I have this piece here, and I have this little standoff. Now each one of those is a multi-bodied part. I actually imported a couple of those and then I created this little standoff. In previous versions of SOLIDWORKS, we actually end up with multiple sheet metal or flat pattern functions. Now they're actually all contained within one item in the feature manager. So again, just to kind of consolidate the feature manager, keep things up a little bit cleaner. You see if I go into my features command and say let's create a pattern, we can select this one body. So we'll select body as the pattern. We'll click on this guy, give it a direction up here, and we'll just make these maybe 25 millimeters apart from each other, and let's just get 2 or 3 of them. So it's placed a couple of those in here. You can see they've been added to this existing flat pattern. It doesn't create additional flat patterns for me. In this particular case, I want to make those a little bit bigger, so I'll just use my drag tools, eyeball that in here, and then use my ruler to snap them in at 50 millimeters apart. So a couple little things there, the feature manager specifically, and hopefully you guys know about the ability to just take those dimensions and drag them around to get to exactly where we're looking at. Now, as far as form tools are concerned, we have the ability now to apply what we call a I can't think of the word now. a center point to our form tools. So if I come in, I'll open up my another sheet metal directory, and in here you see I have my louver, and if I take this louver under the form tool feature, I have the ability now to create an insertion point. This is real handy, not just for inserting the parts, but if your sheet metal manufacturer says, well, we calculate the center point or the dimension for the form tool at a different location, say maybe in the bottom left hand corner, you can select that guy here and move him over here into the corner, and then when you place it, they will be placing it by that corner, plus when you do your dimensioning, you can dimension to that point, and when you create your drawing, you don't have to make changes to your dimensioning values. It will just be there for you. Now, as we did in the past, we do have the ability, again, to have a little bit of fun with our form tools. So if I go in, I grab my louver. When I go to place it, before I let go of the mouse button, I can hit the tab key to change its direction. But after we've placed it, in SOLIDWORKS, we can change what plane we're placing it on. We can change the angle, so I can rotate this, say, 90 degrees. We can use the flip command to define which direction it's going to punch into. If there's part head configurations, I could have different sizes, for example. This little link function, what that does is it actually links it to the form tool. So if I change the form tool, it will change it into all the parts that form tool is being used. If I uncheck that, it breaks that link. So if I change the form, it won't change this part. And of course, I can go into the position tool. We introduced this last year, and I can come in and just place points wherever I want to see the louver. I can line them up. We'll go ahead and pull this out here, and that point is that insertion point that I was just showing you. In this particular case, I can add dimensions to say, well, from here to the side of the part. Sure, we grab the side of the part. We can say this is going to be 72.5 millimeters. And add your relationships, say those are all going to be vertical to each other, that type of thing. But what I do want to point out is some new functionality that we have, or I should say existing enhancement functionality to the drawings for sheet metal. So I'm going to go ahead and make a drawing of this sheet metal part. And we'll just grab the flat pattern. Let me go back in the part, make sure I rebuild and save that. And now let's go back in here. So I should have a flat pattern. Now it's not showing me the flat pattern because I need to rebuild this. It should give me a flat pattern, or unless if I already have the drawing created, which I think I do. Let me right click on here and say let's open the drawing. So SOLIDWORKS is opening the drawing that I already created. Now a few things here. These bend notes, right now it's saying, okay, it's bent down at 90 degrees with a radius of 0.5. If you want to control those bend notes, you can actually select the view now, and then down in my feature manager, I have this option for bend notes. I can say don't display them. I can shut them off so we don't have to look at them at all. Or I can specify what I'd like to see. In this particular case, I'm going to remove all the values out of there, and I can say, well, at first I'd like to see the direction. We'll go ahead and say the direction. This button will let me see the supplementary angle or the complementary angle. We'll go ahead and pull this supplementary, so it's 90 degrees. I can specify the bend radius, bend direction, or bend order. So we'll say the order, and then we'll add the radius. So we'll just change it up a little bit there. Another new function here is if I'm looking at this bend right here, this bend would actually probably be bent as one item. So we can select this note, right click on those two notes and merge those bend notes. So instead of having two notes on here, I can have one note. Also with the bend table, if I select the view, in this case I'll just right click and go to tables and say show me a bend table. It allows me to define the bends by alpha or numeric values now, and we'll go ahead and place that in here. I can place it in here. So in this particular case I'm using alpha numbers, so A, B, C. It's placed all the values in here. You'll see the L does match up. It doesn't put L and M over here. Instead of having two bends. I have one bend listed out, as well as the tables. These are very similar to our bill of materials. I can insert additional columns for this particular example. So I'll put a column on the right, and if I just double click on the header, I can actually pull out different information. In this particular case, I might say show the bend allowance or the bend order. So in this particular case, this part has 15 bends, and show me what each one of the bends are in the order of how I created those bends in the SOLIDWORKS model. So let's talk a little bit more about some additional part functionality. I'm going to go ahead and close my drawings. And the next thing we're going to talk about is some enhancements to the pattern functions, specifically being able to do variable or varying dimensions. So I have a motor guard here. It's got a couple patterns in here, and then I'm going to create one on the fly. And the big thing here is this front pattern. If I edit that pattern, you'll see the pattern was created by having one seed feature. That's this guy down here at the bottom. And I'm patterning him up and then across. So what I was able to do here is, by selecting the vary pattern function, I was able to change the width of the slot. In this particular case, as the slot goes across, it's going to get bigger. I can select my full preview so we can actually see the slot get bigger. So each time it goes across, it gets a little bit bigger. I was also able to change the dimension 2 increment, so it's going to go up 40 millimeters, then it actually skips a 40 and goes another 40 up here. So I've created that pattern, then I mirrored the pattern. On the bottom here, you can see I have a pattern that gets smaller as it goes across. I was able to do this using the seek function. So I started off with a hole right here in the middle that's 100 millimeters tall. And when I go into the pattern and look at its varying function here, I'm taking that value, that 100 millimeter height right here, and decreasing it by 10 millimeters for each step in the pattern. It allows me to go out and make it smaller. Now to actually do something like that, I'm going to create one from scratch. So here's my hole. So here's my hole again. We're going to select a linear pattern, and we'll give it a direction. For the feature, I'm going to use my G key, which gives me my little magnifying glass. That way I can just zoom in without having to zoom on the whole part. And for the values, we'll go ahead and say we're going to pull him down 30 millimeters. And I'd like to see 5 of those in here. So I've got 5 of those going down. And I'm going to come down here, the instance is the vary. By selecting this, I can vary the spacing. So in this particular case, I'm going to change the spacing to 40 millimeters. Excuse me, 7 millimeters. So that's going to increase the spacing or decrease the spacing. Or I can just change that back. What was it again? I did 30 millimeters. And what I'd like to do in this particular case is, if I come down into this box, I can select my dimensional value. So here's my 80 millimeter width and my 80 millimeter height. So I can change those values by coming into the feature manager or clicking on them here and specify I'd like to increment that value by 40 millimeters. So we're going to make them bigger as they grow, and make them a little bit taller by 4 millimeters. By selecting the full preview, it actually gives me that option here. And as it scrolls down, I do want to change the spacing in between them. Now, just a few minutes ago, I typed in 30 there, and that changed that overall 30 to 7. I made a mistake, and I should have clicked in here and said that was 7 millimeters. That will increase it. And you can see it's increasing here, but I have an issue with this particular guy. He's a little bit too tall. So I can actually come down here and select this little dot and say I can skip or modify the instance. This is the new functioning here. I can say modify this instance, and instead of being 140, we'll say it's going to be 150, which will decrease that element size right there. By selecting the checkbox, it's going to go ahead and place my pattern in, and you can see as it grows, it looks pretty good. And then down here, I have a smaller one that account for the little cut back into the part. Now in the past, this would have actually taken several cut features. I would have to create the cut, and then I could have done a pattern of the cut, and this bottom hole would have required a different cut. I wouldn't have been able to do that within the pattern. Alright, so I've saved the funnest or the best for last, and that's our drawing functionality. So let's go ahead and open up a drawing. So I can say just show me the drawings, and we'll grab this guy right here. So again, SOLIDWORKS is constantly trying to improve the drawing functionality within the software. Okay, so let's take a look at some of those new enhancements or functions. So first thing we'll go into is under annotations. If I add center lines to the view, you see we now have an option to say auto insert. So I can just say select the view, click on the view, and when I hit the checkbox, it will place the center lines. Or again, you can just manually select the view here. It will place the center lines in for you. So I'll go through, place all my center lines. Now the big thing is you'll notice the center lines turned red because we have some new options available to us. If we go into our system options and say center line, center marks under my drafting standard, you'll see we have this option here for our layers. In the past, we could automatically have, like, say, dimensions go on a dimension layer, but now we can make the center lines, your center marks. If you go through, you look, you can actually very quickly go through some of the different options as far as your bill of material balloons, have them go on specific layers if you're still if you're using layers in your drawings. So layers in your drawings work out pretty good. In this particular case, you'll see I have some dimensions. My tolerance on those dimensions are my number of decimal places. I've set these out to 2 or 3. In this particular case, I have a dimension with a tolerance that I've added here in the drawing, and it's got 4 decimal place accuracy. By selecting that dimension, we can actually link the dimensions to the precision with the model. So by clicking on that, the model set to 3 decimal places, so it can say, well, this dimension in this particular case is going to be set so it's 3 decimal places also. We also have some new functionality when it comes to the break lines. If I select a dimension or a couple dimensions in here, you see if I come down to break lines under my leaders, I can select break lines. We have new options in here, the break lines at the gaps and at the dimension line. So you can see here it's actually breaking those. As I move this around, you can see it's making those changes dynamically. So I can move these around in here, and it's going to place those breaks in there for me. Again, we've always been able to create them. It just gives us a little bit easier functionality or easier ways to get into those functions. As well, if we look at things like this geometric tolerance block or GTOL block. If I select the GTOL block and edit it, so if I double click on it, you'll see we have a new option here for below frame. What this allows me to do is add text below the frame. So if I add some text, you'll see when I click on the OK button, it goes underneath, but when I click on the OK, it actually adjusts the dimension, so the line's not going up, and if I move it, the text and everything moves together. That's something that a lot of people have been asking SOLIDWORKS for quite a while. Now, when it comes to creating notes, one of the big things here is I have a little note that says break all sharp edges, and I want to link it to a dimension, so I double click on it. I come in and I add my space, but when I was editing the note, I could not zoom or pan. In SOLIDWORKS 2013, I now have the option. I can come in and I can specify what value or what dimension. So in this particular case, I'm going to select this 2.5. I can't even see the note here because I've panned away, but if I go back, you see it's added that little 2.5 in here. Also, if I select the dimension block, so if I come in, select the dimension, I can put a border around it. So if we say, let's put a box around here, it puts a box, but the box is pretty close, so we have this new option here for padding to allow you to come in and say, let's add some padding around it. And you can say how big it's going to be, so we'll just say tight fit. With the padding, it allows us to go ahead and expand that out a little. Works the same way. If I go into the note and select an item within the note, I can come in and place a border around it. So we'll place a little box, and we have padding options as well. So we can put that in there. If you're adding things like general tables, this was a little frustrating that if you took the general table and you moved it, you got a little bit smaller. The columns or the row heights would automatically adjust, but if you came back and made it back to around the same size, or you adjusted it, they stayed exactly where they were. With 2013, you'll see here the row heights automatically adjust. So if I pull it here, it goes into kind of a word wrap feature. Then if I pull it back out, it takes off that word wrap, but it's adjusting the height of the columns as well. I think this is the last thing I'll show you here on this drawing in particular. And I have some baseline dimensioning. So I have this 9.2, 13, 14, and 45. I need to add the baseline dimensions for this little O-ring groove, for example. We have a new option in here. You can right click on something that's made through a baseline. It's like add the baseline. It's very similar to what we had with ordinate dimensions. But by selecting add the baseline, I can use just say let's continue and apply the current rules to the baseline. What this just simply means that I didn't create this drawing in the previous or in the current version of SOLIDWORKS, and it's going to take the existing baseline, add the new functionality to it by selecting OK, and I can just come over here and add my dimensions. Now you notice it is adding those into the existing baseline. And then once I've added those in, we'll go ahead and highlight the dimensions, adjust their spacing so they're not so far, or not put them a little bit closer so they're not going off the drawing sheet. Let's just say maybe 0.75, 1.5. Oh, that's a little bit too big. So we'll just add that in here and say, well, let's say 0.9. That looks pretty good for me for now. You can make those changes in here. You can adjust the height and stuff as well. So I think I got everything on this drawing view. I do want to show you a few things as far as section views are concerned. Now I have a drawing of an assembly. Oh, you know what? Before I do that, let's go look at the saving views function. I need to save this view out. I've got this view here, front view with all the dimensions, and somebody's asked for a DXF of this, and I don't need all the other views. So with SOLIDWORKS 2013, if you select a view, you now have an option of coming down and saying Save View As. Now you can save this view with a different coordinate system. So where is 0? That's what this little blue arrow is indicating. And then when I hit the Save button, this will allow me to save this off as a DXF or a DWG. We of course have all the traditional options. What version? We'll go all the way back to version 12 of the DXF, for example, and enable the one-to-one output. So in the view that I'm saving off of the DXF, it will be one-to-one. And we could save that off as a DXF, as well as the ability, if I take a view and right-click on it, we have the option of converting this view to a sketch. Now by selecting that view, I can actually replace the view with the sketch. I can create it as a block. Now where this is really handy is when you have the same view that needs to be placed in multiple drawing sheets, or if the view gets really complex, you can say make this a sketch. Now it does just remove the associativity to the part so that view doesn't update anymore, but it's much quicker because it's just sketch entities at this point. So we could say, you know, insert this as a block. Again, we can change the insertion point and say we're going to put that right in there. We'll insert it as a block by hitting the checkbox. It's going to convert that. And now I have a block that can be scaled, for example. So we can come in and change its scaling to 0.5, make it a little bit smaller. And I can place this view or this block on another sheet and also take it and save it off as a block to be used in other drawings, for example. So as I mentioned, we're going to finish up with the drawings here. I have one last thing to show you. That's with my section views. I need to go into another directory and get my section view. Section. So we'll go ahead and open up this drawing here. Now what I have is 3 views of the same assembly, and I need to create some section views on here. Now a couple things have happened here with the section view. One, the section view creation is a lot quicker. So when SOLIDWORKS has to go in and create section views, the geometry engine behind it is actually quicker, and the section view tool itself has been completely redone for SOLIDWORKS 2013. Let's go ahead and zoom in and show you what I'm talking about here. So if I go into the view layout and select section view, I have these options here for my cutting line. If I place my cursor into the view, if I hit the tab key, it'll actually switch between the different options. In this particular case, I'm going to just start off with just a basic section view going through the center. So basically, just say section view, hit my checkbox, and it's going to go ahead and create the section view for me. It's an assembly, so it'll actually give me some options in here, and you can see how quickly I can create that section view. Let's go ahead and play with some options in here. So I'm going to say section view again. And in this particular case, we're going to say, let's do, we'll just do a vertical section view through here, lining up with the center. But this option here, these buttons here, allow me to add breaks or jogs. So in this particular case, I'm going to add a little jog right here. We'll go ahead and say we'll start it right here. I'm going to go over here to this corner, or the center of that circle. And then we'll add a little bend or an arc offset to go from the center of this circle over here to the center of this circle. And then we'll hit the checkbox. And see, it's going to create a section view based off of where I have the lines going through. So in this particular case, it's going to go up through here, cross over up into this hole, cross over into this hole, so we can see those holes being placed through here into this section view. So it's kind of a folding in going on in there. Now if you just want to do a nice little section view, so we're just cutting a piece of the pie out, for example, when I select section view, we can just select this guy right here, the align section view, and just pop him in here. I just put him here into the center. Let's zoom in a little bit so I can make sure I grab the center. And then at this point I can just go in and say, let's go through the center of this hole. So grab him. And we'll back up. I made a little mistake there. So we'll place him in here. We'll place him through the center of that hole, and then make sure that he's going straight down or lining up with the center of this hole. In my checkbox, I can add additional jogs, but we'll just hit the checkbox in here. And it's created that section view. So that's what I have for today. Don't forget to check out our YouTube channel at www.youtube.com/GoEngineer, as well as GoEngineer's website for additional webinars. We try to hold these things at least once every month. We do tips and tricks, as well as these kind of what's new functions in a web series. Again, my name is John Lieber with GoEngineer, and I hope you enjoyed the presentation.